Hey gang, I'm going to try and put together a really quick presentation here, touching on several of the biggest ideas in our current chapter and relating to our current topic. And that's the influence of organizational culture on ethical practice. The main point I want to get across is this is most definitely a very real topic, and it addresses some very real dynamics. I think all of us can look back on our past employment places where we've worked, and it's really clear that the culture of the organizations that we work in has a material effect on the way people behave, right? So that's the broadest point of this lecture in this chapter, that counselors are influenced by the environments in which they work. Um, the, the, the big idea that I want to get across, and I think this is fairly typical of the way that I look at ethics, the key here is awareness, right? Um, we all, in one way or another, are part of the culture inherent in our workplaces. Uh, we need to be aware of that culture and aware of how it influences us and where it may bring out the best in us and kind of facilitate the best ethical decisions that we can make, and where it maybe doesn't bring out the best. I'm actually not going to go over all of these bullets because I think I said everything that I'd like to say. Again, we're talking about culture, and what is that? That's really just the social system that is in place anywhere, including in a workplace. It's built out of a group of people that have some stability in community together over shared time. Out of that arises behavioral norms, right? Happens at the level of countries, states, and certainly within a workplace. And just like some of these bigger settings, geographical settings, like say a country, within a workplace, subcultures can certainly exist. And the big point, again, that I want to make is we want to be aware. We want to be aware of what's going on. We want to know who our friends and our colleagues are. We want to be aware how those relationships, what I'm primarily concerned about is how those relationships influence my behavior. We'll talk a little bit about whistleblowing, and we've talked some about reporting bad behavior and stuff like that. But the big piece that I want us to be aware of, because I think this is the biggest way that organizational culture can influence us, is, who am I friends with? Am I adopting norms from my friends and colleagues that aren't necessarily in line with my ethics? And it happens. A related but slightly different point is that often organizations will be rooted in kind of a medical or patriarchal culture. That's not necessarily in line with the tenets of rehabilitation counseling and counseling in general. So it's good for us to be aware that we need to make decisions that meet the needs of our organization, but that also reflect good clinical work and this ethical standards of our field and fields, right? And that's not to say that our organizations are going to consistently steer us in the wrong direction, but it is to say that sometimes, for example, performance measures within a workplace might not reflect necessarily the best interest of clients. It might not be the worst interest of clients. Let's say you're working in a rehab setting and all they want is closed cases, successful rehab. Well, that's important, right? but we want to, as counselors, we want to continue to think of our clients as individuals, not just as outcome chits, CHITS, outcome chits for our organization. So organizational climate is built from a lot of things. The organization systems of practice and procedures, the degree to which we feel safe in that organization, the degree to which we feel safe within that organization when and if we dissent from predominating opinion. Are we in a place where it is accepted and encouraged for us to stand up and clarify when we think something is not going the way that it should? And again, the organizational climate, the culture is sort of the shared sense of all this stuff. How does everyone feel? You know, is the tone like, keep your head down, don't make any bumps in the road? Or is the tone like, you know what, we should bring our best all the time? And what do we do when there is more of a keep your head down kind of tone? So we are accountable to our organizations, right? We're accountable to our field, our code of ethics, and our clients, but we are also accountable to our organizations. Thinking back to when we looked at the ethical principles, I think a lot of us became aware that, say, for example, veracity, the principle of veracity, while yes, it applies to clients and consumers, it also applies to our organization. So the challenge that we can run into sometimes is, okay, I can clearly see that my organization is in the wrong, in my view, on a given issue. Well, we still don't have the right to kind of just toss that aside, right? Well, organization wants this. I'm going to do what I can to keep people off my back and not be true to the organizational standard. That can be the temptation, right? How do we avoid that? How do we integrate the perspective of an organization with our perspectives as clinicians? Again, I don't want to beat on this too much. When we are employed by an organization, we do have responsibilities to that organization. They are paying us. They have defined the mission of the organization, and we have signed on as participants in that. So integrity and ethics pushes us to engage our organizations honestly when we feel change is needed. Of course, I'll post these slides without narration. You can go through them as slowly as you'd like. A lot of this comes right out of our text. Factors that influence the organizational climate and subsequently ethical decisions are the way that employees, colleagues are socialized. How do the relationships within the work setting work? What kind of roles do people hold? And then what are the feelings, I think particularly, say, of management and supervisory levels, what are those folks' feelings about professional development and about the autonomy and the respect for individual clinicians? So again, what are we shooting for here in this lecture and in this module is awareness, increased awareness of factors, organizational factors that can influence our ethical decision making. Kind of more of the same, other elements of social culture and influences of social dynamics. How organizations engage impaired professionals is a big deal. And this is something I've seen repeatedly. Um, Several former colleagues jump into my mind who I can think of, um, who were not well equipped to be doing their jobs at the time they were doing them. Folks that were overwhelmed, that were burned out, that had their own emotional issues going on, and this impaired their ability to provide services. Therefore, it impaired the client outcomes, and more broadly, it really has a negative effect on the whole organization, right? Um, Clients can be transferred from counselor to counselor, sometimes within organizations. And if a client has worked with a counselor for several years, when that counselor really has no business counseling, it sets up that counselor's colleagues to also not be able to provide effective services. So clearly there are a range of circumstances, situations, and dynamics that can lead to this situation. We're not going to be able to kind of carve them all out, but it is a framework you want to have operating in your mind. Is there or are there colleagues in your setting who are impaired? Is that affecting the way services are delivered? Is it affecting client outcomes? And is it affecting the way that you deliver services? We talk on the slide here, it talks about violation of professional boundaries and substance abuse. That's not what I've seen as much. I've seen burnout and job stress is number one, and then mental health issues, practitioner mental health issues, number two. And most frequently, perhaps, or very frequently, perhaps, a combination burnout, job stress, and mental health issues. And you can see this come together for people, and they really feel very lost and isolated in their professional role, and things can really kind of unravel from there. Some symptoms of burnout, symptoms and causes of burnout: emotional exhaustion, depersonalization. So if a counselor is really burned out and overwhelmed, not handling their role well, how well are they engaging their clients? Not very well, probably, right? If they're looking at each client meeting as a very kind of a little tidbit of time to just get through, what's their presence going to be like? What are their counseling micro skills going to be like? Not very strong, right? So these are factors to be attuned to. And again, there are so many varied situations that I'm not going to be able to make recommendations that apply across the board, except for to be aware and to really think of yourself as an agent that would improve the overall situation. Certainly job stress can lead to burnout. Not all stress is kind of burnout driven. Sometimes a appropriate amount of stress can be just what we need to kind of get the job well done. To kind of get to the end of a day and feel like we really did what we needed to do, and it can kind of heighten our engagement a little bit. This is clearly a different type of stress than someone who is just buried in stress and does not have any sense of relief. We've talked a lot about boundaries, dual relationships. I'm actually not going to talk too much about it here now, except for to say that I have seen probably where mental health on the side of the counselor is a factor here in kind of murky boundaries. And then also these factors can be on the client side too. It's not necessarily presented on the slide this way, but there are some groups of clients that may, I don't want to say encourage, but may be more susceptible to boundary violations by counselors, or may kind of lend themselves, as again, that's not great language. Uh, I'll go with vulnerability. Sometimes folks, especially with, say, personality issues, uh, the old access to, we don't have access to anymore, but think to your diagnostic class, folks with personality issues can have a difficult time governing interpersonal relationships. And for those folks, and I'm talking about clients here, counseling client relationships can feel very much like conventional social relationships. If a counselor isn't ready to engage this dynamic and hasn't been thoughtful about this dynamic themselves, they can somewhat easily end up in inappropriate relationships with clients. And I'm not just talking about sexual relationships, I'm talking more broadly inappropriate relationships. So some risk factors for counselors some factors that place counselors at risk for boundary violations. Apparently male experiencing burnout, someone feeling professionally isolated, somebody who's in the midst of life crisis, and somebody experiencing distress in their private life. And I've certainly seen this. I'm probably biased as being a male. I haven't noticed males more specifically than females, but certainly burned out, isolated, life crisis, and distress across life areas increases the temptation to engage with clients in ways that are other than clinically guided, right? And so again, we're not talking about just sexual relationships, but we're talking about inappropriate relationships. Mobbing is something that I would like to talk a little bit about. It is amazing, and I'm sure you all have seen this, how much adults are like elementary school students in ways, and how within a social system, a person can become a target. No one deserves to be a target, but even someone who has an inclination towards behaviors that probably repeatedly get them in the target seat, that's still not appropriate, right? It's still not appropriate, even if someone kind of brings it upon themselves. It's not a healthy workplace that responds to maladaptive behavior with more maladaptive behavior at the group level. So it's things to be aware of. Do we see cliques in an office? Do we see kind of targeting? Are there derogatory nicknames that are used about certain clients or certain colleagues when they're not around? All of these things are important to be aware of, and important to think about. How do we respond in these situations? What's our role? How do we keep our center, do good work, contribute to our organization, not sabotage ourselves, and do the most ethical thing that we can do at all times? This slide here talks about some phases that can happen within mobbing. Actually, the term mobbing I had never heard before using our current text, but it fits it pretty perfectly. Conflict among employees, aggressive acts, maybe by the group towards the targeted employee, the involvement of management. It can really, really bring down a workplace, and in many ways can bring down the actual quality of the work, and it can make it more difficult to go to work and feel like a professional if this type of stuff is going on. And it does happen. So we need to be aware of these dynamics and aware of how we avoid playing into them and how we can improve situations more generally. Certainly in my experience, I have seen bad management as the cause or a cause in this type of situation. Stress-intensive workplace, monotony, managers who are completely disengaged. They have their minds on one thing, while the counselors have their minds on another thing. These kind of dynamics do happen in workplaces. Even a workplace that's generally a good, healthy workplace can go through phases like this. So again, I think the main message that I want us to take away is, how do we respond? Whistleblowing is a fairly specific topic. Our text gives us some guidelines for how to engage in whistleblowing appropriately. And as we have discussed, there are situations in which we are mandated by our codes of ethics to report certain behavior. Obviously, the benefits are improving the clinical environment, facilitation of communication among colleagues, and really just kind of an airing, A-I-R-I-N-G, of grievances is generally healthful. At the same time, when we do find ourselves considering assuming a whistleblowing role, we want to protect ourselves. We want to be aware of any institutions that protect employees. Is there a union that you can talk to first? Is there some sort of representative? Is there legal assistance? Do you have a colleague who you trust absolutely, who's been with an organization for a long time? So that if we are going to engage in whistleblowing behavior, we really want to think it out methodically, not kind of just spur the moment decide we're going to take on the man, because without a good strategy and decent support, we can end up in a rough place. Okay, my goal was to get through this fairly quickly. I think I did okay with that. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up now. You'll have a great week, and we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.